Live on your side, WBRC 6 News at 10 starts right now.
We have an update tonight on a story that horrified the community this week. Birmingham police have arrested 3 people as they investigate the shooting that killed a 21-year-old mother.
Your reporter James Giles covered the press conference about that shooting at the Monarch Ridge Apartments. He's live and on your side with the latest tonight.
It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday night in Birmingham, Alabama. But just before 10:30 p.m., that normal night broke apart. Gunfire ripped through the Monarch Ridge Apartments, loud, rapid, non-stop. Not a few shots, not even close. More than 168 rounds were fired. Neighbors said it sounded like a war zone, and the most disturbing part? This wasn't hidden. The entire situation, the buildup, the threats, the confrontation, and what came after, was captured on camera. Streamed live on Facebook as it unfolded. People didn't hear about it later. They watched it happen in real time. A young mom was caught in the middle of it all. She had gone to the apartment complex to confront another young woman, Jania Hendricks, after an argument that started online about a man. By the time the gunfire stopped, 21-year-old Asia Poole was dead. Her best friend, Dearia Rankins, had been shot and wounded, and 5 people would soon be facing murder charges. But the question is, how did something that started earlier that night turn into this? Before we go further, take a second to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles and let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? And have you ever seen a situation escalate like this? Asia Poole was just 21 years old. To most people reading headlines, that number might pass quickly. But 21 isn't just an age, it's a stage of life. It's where people are still figuring things out, still making mistakes, still trying to find stability. For Asia, that stage came with responsibilities far heavier than most. She was a mother, and that alone changes everything. Her life wasn't just about herself anymore. It revolved around her child, the routines, the care, the constant decisions that come with trying to raise someone depending entirely on you. Those who knew her didn't just see a young woman navigating adulthood. They saw someone who loved her child deeply, someone who showed up in the ways she could, even when life around her wasn't always stable. She lived in Birmingham, Alabama, a place where communities are tightly connected, where people know each other, where news travels fast. It's also a place where, like many others, daily life can bring its share of challenges. Financial pressure, relationship stress, and the influence of the people around you can all shape decisions in ways that aren't always obvious in the moment. Asia was part of that environment. She had friends, she had connections, she had people she trusted and people she spent time with. Her social circle, like many at that age, was a mix of loyalty, emotion, and sometimes conflict. Relationships weren't always simple, and tensions could build quietly before anyone outside noticed. And at the center of what would later unfold was a relationship. There was a man involved. What's important here is not speculation, but the reality that emotional ties, especially when mixed with pride, misunderstanding, or disagreement, can quickly become complicated. Situations involving relationships often carry more weight than they appear on the surface. Feelings run deeper, reactions become stronger, and decisions made in those moments aren't always rational. For Asia, this wasn't just about showing up somewhere. It was personal. But outside of that moment, outside of the conflict that would later define how people remember her, Asia was more than the situation she found herself in that night. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman trying to balance life while carrying responsibilities many twice her age still struggle with. And most importantly, she was her child's entire world. That's the part that rarely gets enough attention in stories like this. When a life is lost, especially so suddenly, the impact doesn't stop at the person. It spreads outward, to the people who depended on them, who loved them, who expected to see them again the next day. For Asia's child, this wasn't just a loss, it was the loss of a mother. The person who would have been there for birthdays, for school days, for life moments both big and small. The person who would have answered questions, offered comfort, and provided a sense of safety that only a parent can give. All of that, gone in a single night. And that's what makes what happened next even harder to process. Because when you look at who Asia was, her age, her responsibilities, her role as a mother, You realize this wasn't someone living a reckless life with nothing to lose. She had everything to live for. Which raises a question that becomes impossible to ignore as the story moves forward. What could have pulled her into a situation that ended like this? The night didn't begin with gunshots. It began with tension. In the hours leading up to that night, there was already friction. At the center of it was a personal issue involving a man, something that had clearly created conflict between people in the same circle. These kinds of situations rarely stay private. They move through friend groups, through conversations, through opinions, and with each version that's told, emotions tend to rise. By the time Asia Poole made the decision to go to that apartment complex, this wasn't just about talking things through. It was about confrontation. She didn't go there by accident. She showed up with a purpose, to address the situation directly. Whether it was to defend herself, to stand her ground, or to demand answers, one thing is clear. She expected a face-to-face encounter. And that decision changed everything. It was an apartment complex, a space where multiple people were already present, people who knew each other, people who were connected in different ways, and most importantly, people who would witness what happened next. When she arrived, the atmosphere wasn't neutral. There was already an edge to it. Voices were raised, attention shifted. People began to gather, not necessarily to stop anything, but to watch. In environments like this, the presence of a crowd can change the direction of a situation almost instantly. What could have been a private disagreement becomes public. And once it's public, the pressure builds. No one wants to look weak. No one wants to back down in front of others. That's where things begin to escalate. Asia wasn't alone in how she felt that night. The person she came to confront also had their own emotions, their own perspective, their own reasons for standing their ground. And when two people meet in that kind of mindset, when neither side is willing to step away, the situation becomes unpredictable. At that point, it wasn't about resolving anything anymore. It was about proving something. And as more people gathered, the energy shifted even further. Some watched, some recorded, others reacted to what they were seeing, feeding into the moment without realizing what it could become. That's how quickly things can change. But here's the part that stands out the most. At this point, it still could have ended with just words. The argument didn't take long to start. What began as words, sharp, direct, filled with emotion, quickly turned into something more. Voices rose, people moved closer, the distance between them disappeared. And in a matter of seconds, the confrontation shifted from verbal to physical. The first contact changed everything. Once it became a fight, there was no control left in the situation. It wasn't organized. It wasn't contained. It moved, fast and unpredictable, spilling across the apartment complex as both women pushed, pulled, and struggled against each other. At one point, the fight reached the hood of a car. Bodies leaning, slipping, grabbing for balance while the confrontation continued. It wasn't just about anger anymore. It had become a spectacle. Something people were drawn to, something they wanted to see play out. And that's exactly what happened. Phones came out almost immediately. Screens lit up. Some held their devices steady, recording every moment. Others shifted positions to get a better angle. A situation that could have been broken up in seconds was now being documented from multiple directions. The energy changed. So instead of slowing down, the intensity increases. The fight continued, moving away from the car, across the open space of the complex. Voices from the crowd grew louder. Some shouted, some reacted to every moment. The tension didn't stay between the two women. It spread outward, pulling everyone nearby into the atmosphere of it. And no one stepped in. That's what stands out the most. There were enough people there to stop it. Enough people to create space, to separate them, to shift the situation before it got worse. But instead, the moment stretched longer and longer. And with each passing second, it became harder to control. Because fights like this don't stay the same. They evolve. The longer it continued, the more unstable it became. Emotions weren't settling, they were rising. The presence of the crowd didn't calm things down, it fueled it. And somewhere within that group, the situation was no longer just about the two people fighting. It was becoming something bigger. Something no one was prepared to stop. Because someone in that crowd wasn't just watching, the fight was still ongoing. But something shifted. Quietly. In a way most people there didn't immediately notice. Because while attention was locked on the fight, movement was happening elsewhere. Subtle, but significant. The kind of movement that doesn't stand out until it's too late. Then, everything stopped for a second. It wasn't planned, it wasn't coordinated. It was just one of those moments where the energy changes, where something in the air feels different, even if no one can explain why. And in that brief pause, a weapon was introduced. What had been a physical confrontation instantly became something far more dangerous. The dynamic changed in a way that no one there could control anymore. Because once a weapon enters a situation like that, the rules are gone. There's no going back to just a fight. There's no slowing things down. There's no undoing what's about to happen. People began to react, but not all at once. Some didn't even realize what was happening yet. Others hesitated, trying to process it. A few started to move away, sensing the shift before they fully understood it. And then, the first shot rang out. It cut through everything, the noise, the shouting, the movement. For a split second, there was confusion, a break in the rhythm of the moment. People looking around, trying to figure out where it came from, what it meant, what was happening. But that moment didn't last, because one shot didn't stay one shot. It triggered something. People started running, some dropped to the ground, others tried to get out of the way, but there was no clear direction, no safe space, no time to think. The environment that had felt contained just moments earlier now felt exposed from every angle. Because when gunfire starts in a crowded space, there's nowhere to hide, and right in the middle of it all, Asia Poole was still there. Caught in a situation that had escalated far beyond anything she could have expected when she first arrived. What started as a confrontation had turned into something no one present could control anymore. And the most dangerous part? It wasn't over. Because that first shot was only the beginning. And that's when the situation crossed a line it could never come back from. What followed after that first shot was not a pause. It was an explosion. Gunfire erupted in rapid succession, loud, continuous, overwhelming. The sound didn't come in single bursts anymore. It came in waves, one after another, so fast it blurred into something almost constant. People screamed. Some dropped instantly, trying to make themselves smaller, trying to disappear from the line of fire. Because when shots are coming from multiple directions, confusion takes over. No one knows where it's safe. No one knows where to go. And in that kind of moment, even a few seconds feel like too long. The number kept rising, shot after shot after shot. By the time it ended, more than 168 rounds had been fired. That number is hard to process. It wasn't a single reaction. It wasn't a brief exchange. It was sustained, relentless gunfire in a space filled with people who had just moments earlier been standing around, watching what they thought was just a fight. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. No shouting, no movement, just the aftermath of what had happened settling in all at once. People slowly began to look around. Some were still on the ground. Others stepped out from where they had taken cover. The confusion hadn't gone away, but now it was mixed with something else. Reality. And in that reality, Asia Poole was lying on the ground, unresponsive. The energy that had filled the space earlier, the shouting, the movement, the crowd, was gone. Replaced by stillness, by shock, by the realization that what had just happened couldn't be undone. Moments earlier she had been standing. Now, she wasn't. And for those who were there, the scene didn't feel real anymore. The transition from a fight to this level of violence happened so quickly that it left people struggling to process what they had just witnessed, because no one expects something like that to happen in front of them. Not like that. Not that fast, and not with that level of force. What makes it even more difficult to accept is how many people were caught in it. How a situation involving a few individuals expanded into something that put everyone nearby in danger. All because the moment crossed a line. And once it did, there was no stopping it. At this point, what do you think could have stopped this from happening? Let me know in the comments. The silence didn't last long. Within minutes, the sound of sirens began to fill the area, growing louder as emergency vehicles approached the apartment complex. What had just happened was impossible to ignore. Calls had already come in from multiple people, all describing the same thing in different ways. Gunfire, chaos, people running. When officers arrived, the scene was nothing like what they typically encounter after a single shooting. This was widespread. Shell casings were scattered across the ground, covering different parts of the complex. The damage was visible immediately. Cars riddled with bullet holes, shattered glass, and evidence of how far the gunfire had spread. It wasn't contained to one spot. It had moved through the area, leaving a clear trail of how intense the situation had become. In the middle of it all, Asia Poole. Emergency responders moved quickly, but the extent of her injuries made the situation clear. Despite the efforts to help, she didn't survive. And she wasn't the only one affected. Her best friend Dearia Rankins had been injured during the shooting, caught in the same chaos that had unfolded so rapidly. It reinforced just how many people had been put at risk in those moments. This wasn't a controlled act. It was something that impacted anyone who happened to be there. As officers secured the area, the focus shifted from response to investigation. What happened here? Who was responsible? And how did it escalate to this level? It didn't take long for investigators to realize that this wasn't a situation involving just one person. Based on what witnesses described and what was found at the scene, multiple individuals had played a role in what happened that night. That changed the direction of the case immediately. As the investigation moved forward, arrests were made. 5 individuals were taken into custody in connection with Asia Poole's death. Among them were both adults and at least one minor, highlighting how wide the involvement had spread. The charges reflected the severity of what had taken place: murder, attempted murder, and other serious offenses tied to the shooting. Each arrest added another layer to the case. Because it confirmed what the scene had already suggested, this wasn't a single moment of violence from one person. It was a chain of actions involving multiple people, each contributing in some way to how far the situation escalated. Back in the community, the reaction was immediate. Residents who lived in the area were left shaken. For many, this wasn't just something they heard about, it was something they experienced firsthand. The sound of gunfire, the sight of people running, the aftermath left behind, it all became part of their reality. And for those who knew Asia, the loss hit differently. She wasn't just a name connected to a case. She was someone they had seen, spoken to, shared space with. Someone whose life ended in a way that felt sudden and overwhelming. There was also another layer to the reaction, one that came from watching how everything unfolded. Because this wasn't hidden. Parts of the incident had been recorded, shared, viewed by people far beyond that apartment complex. Streamed on Facebook, what happened that night didn't just stay within the community. It spread, raising questions not just about the violence itself, but about the environment that allowed it to happen. What stood out in this case wasn't only the number of shots fired. It was what happened before the first one. Because this entire situation didn't unfold in private. It unfolded in front of an audience. As the confrontation turned into a fight, people didn't step in, they stepped closer. Phones came out, screens lit up. Some held their cameras steady, recording every second. Others moved around to get a better view, reacting to what they were seeing as if it were something meant to be watched. And in that moment, the purpose of the crowd shifted. It wasn't about stopping the situation anymore. It was about capturing it. Parts of the incident were live-streamed and recorded, turning a real-life conflict into something that could be viewed in real time by others, even those who weren't physically there. That changes how people behave. When there's an audience, whether in person or online, decisions aren't just about the moment anymore. They're about perception, about pride, about not backing down. Because once a situation is being watched, stepping away doesn't feel like an option to some people. It feels like losing in front of everyone. And that pressure builds quickly. At the same time, another effect takes hold, the bystander effect. With so many people present, responsibility becomes unclear. Everyone assumes someone else will step in, someone else will break it up, someone else will stop it before it goes too far. But no one does. And the longer that continues, the more the situation escalates. That's exactly what happened here. There were enough people there to intervene, enough to separate those involved, to create distance, to slow things down before it reached a critical point. But instead of de-escalating, the crowd became part of the environment that allowed it to grow. Reactions from the outside, cheering, shouting, recording, can unintentionally push things further. What might have ended in seconds stretches into minutes. Emotions rise instead of settling, and the situation becomes harder to control with each passing moment. Because group dynamics don't always calm situations. Sometimes they amplify them. When no one steps forward, the momentum continues in one direction, toward escalation. And once that momentum reaches a certain point, it becomes unstoppable. Sometimes, the most dangerous part of a situation isn't the people fighting, it's the people watching. Because in moments like this, the crowd doesn't just witness what happens, it shapes it. And in this case, that influence played a role in how a confrontation turned into something far more devastating than anyone expected. Asia Poole was more than what happened that night. She was a 21-year-old mother, someone with responsibilities, with a child who depended on her, with a future that was still being built one day at a time. Her life wasn't defined by a single moment, but that moment is what took everything away. And now what remains is absence. A child who will grow up without her. Without the presence that would have shaped birthdays, milestones, and everyday moments that most people take for granted. Without the person who would have been there through everything. That's the part that stays long after the headlines fade. Because while the chaos of that night was loud, filled with gunfire, movement, and fear, the ending is quiet. Still. Final. The same place that once held voices, movement, and life, left behind silence. And when you think back to how it all started, a confrontation, a moment, a decision, it's hard not to see how quickly everything changed, how fast life can shift from normal to irreversible. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell me, what would you have done differently in that moment?